All right, so go ahead here. I'm using Visual Studio Code to open up the project that we just created, which is compare-angular. So sort of a similar folder structure that we had before. This is just for testing. You have to really worry about that. Node modules, because this is a Node.js based project. And then we have our source. And right here, the one file to pay attention to is index.html, which is the starting point of our app. The one thing to take note of is this app-root right here. So this right here is where the app will actually be placed in. And if we open up the app folder and go to app.component.ts, and that is for TypeScript, which is a superset of JavaScript that compiles down to JavaScript. So TypeScript gives you certain advantages over just writing plain JavaScript. You can just write JavaScript if you wish, though. All right, so if we look in our app.component.ts file, you'll see that we have a selector here, and this whole thing right here is called your component decorator. And inside of it, you basically specify a series of properties that configure this given component. So they always have a selector, and this is app.root, which corresponds to this index.html app.root right here. Okay, so going back to this file, we could also see that we have a template URL property, and this is bound to an external HTML file, which is located right here. And then as well, we have a style URLs property, which lets you specify an external SAS or CSS or SCSS file for the different, let me find it right here. By default, it's just empty for your different styles associated with this given component. All right, and then finally down here, we also have the export class app component. This is where all the logic goes. So dependency injection, defining your methods and your properties, all go right here. We can see one by default is created called title. If we go back to our app component.html, we'll see it's referenced here through interpolation as title. All right, so that's basically, a crash course of how, a very rough and simplified sense of how Angular is set up to work. So let's go ahead and get started. And the first thing we're going to do is to generate some components with the CLI. So unlike the other two tools for Vue and React, the Angular CLI lets us real quickly just generate these files instead of having to manually create them for ourselves. So what we'll do is go back to our console here, and I'm going to get up another console window because I'm going to leave this ng-serve ran. And here I am inside the project folder. And before we look at this real quick, I'm going to bring back the Adobe XD mockup and prototype that we designed in the very first section of this course. And again, just to go over this, in terms of how the components are structured, we have a header here, or a navigation rather, and then we have a footer down here, and then we have inside of here a component that will show a home, and then also over here a component that will show a fact page. All right, so we could generate a component for these, for the navigation and the footer. However, if you know that they're going to be present on every page, then you don't really have to generate a component specifically for those. Instead, we're just going to place the HTML and the CSS and the coding for that inside of our app.component.ts file that we already looked at. So really that just leaves the FAQ and the home components to generate. So it looks like this. We're going to access the CLI by ng. Now we could say generate or simply G, which is shorthand for generate. You can use either or. And then component, or C for component, which is shorthand. You can use either or. And then the name of the component. So the first one we'll do is home. Hit enter. You can see it generates several files for us and also updates our app.module.ts file. And then we'll also hit the up arrow key and change this to FAQ. All right, simple enough. So let's go back to our project here real quick. All right, so now we have two folders based on the component names we generated. So FAQ and home. All right. In the next section, we're going to go ahead and get focused on tying these components together and setting up our routing.